Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I know it's been a while since I've uploaded a video, but it's been crazy with work plus the holidays, and you know how it can get kind of crazy. So I just wanted to come back in the new year fresh with some new videos and wanted to just update you all on how I've been here in Sweden. Specifically about one thing, I get a lot of questions about what it's like being Black in Sweden, and to be honest, I never really know how to answer it. In a lot of ways, it's like being Black anywhere else that's majority white, and in other ways, it's very unique. It's a very unique experience to living in Scandinavia. So I don't know. I've had a lot of challenges kind of articulating the experience for myself until I picked up this book in a bookstore, and it's called In Every Mirror She's Black. So I found this book randomly on a trip to London, and then I read the infold. I was like, this is so specific to my experience, like I have to read this. And it's about three women who find themselves in Stockholm, Sweden, some by choice and some out of necessity. And I really found that this book spoke to my experience as a Black woman here in Sweden so well that I had to talk about it. And I was kind of thinking that I could use this book as a conduit to explore and examine my own experiences living here as a Black American woman who identifies many intersections, specifically who identifies racially as Black. Ethnically, my ethnicity is African, specifically Nigerian, and nationality, I'm American. And so I just thought this book really explored all of those different intersections very, very well. And so I wanted to just talk about it a little bit and give like a little bit of a lighthearted review and then going into some of the major themes. So this video is going to be broken down into 6 parts. The first part is going to be more of a general review, and then after I'm going to be getting into a few spoilers. So if you have read the book, I would love for you to keep watching and listening in, or if you haven't yet and if you just want to just hear my thoughts on some of those concepts, please continue listening as well. So yeah, first part, no spoilers. After that will be spoilers, so listen with caution. Stay tuned and I will get into my initial thoughts on this book. So the book centers around 3 Black women, Kemi, Brittany Ray, and Muna, who find themselves in Sweden. One by choice, the other for love, and one out of necessity. Kemi is a successful marketing executive who is recruited to work at a Swedish firm, and Brittany Ray is a former flight attendant and former model who meets a Swedish man on one of her flights and begins a whirlwind romance. And Muna is a refugee from Somalia who ends up losing her entire family through the journey as well as from war. The book also their lives also center around a Swedish businessman named Johnny, who is successful, and the chapters kind of tell a little bit about each of their stories. This book was very captivating to me. It tackles race, classism, tokenism, fetishization of Black bodies, sexism, and even xenophobia. And you wouldn't think that I would relate so much to a book tackling so many of these issues, but as a Black woman who's read a lot of books by a lot of Black women, you realize that the Black experience is not a monolith. And even though I might relate to bits and pieces of a different story from each of these women, there is something about the way the book is written that just ties them together so well that I see myself in each of the women, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But you see these women kind of navigating this new country and all their new rules and conventions and setbacks, while also trying to move through a place that's always been typically seen as a utopia. People think about Scandinavia as this socialist utopia where nothing goes wrong, when in reality it's just a place just like any other place, and you have to make it your home and you have to find your way on your own. And I love how the author weaves through each character's unique experiences and weaves them together. You see their perspectives change drastically throughout the book, from Kemi, who sees the grass as greener on the other side with coming to Sweden despite having never lived here before or visited, but she's lured by the promise of a new career and a fresh start because she feels stuck in her current position and stuck in her life in the US, in Washington, D.C. Brittany is lured by the hope of love, even though she has a perfectly good relationship at home, but she's just tired of being the one who is of service to others, and she sees in Johnny the promise of never having to lift a finger and having to be taken care of, which is something that a lot of Black women can relate to when we are often the caretakers and we are the ones who put on the burden of others. It can definitely be tempting to think about never having to do that again, never having to work again. And Muna, who's here by necessity, but who is also lured by the promise of fulfilling dreams that she never had when she was in Mogadishu, and of offering her new life in Sweden and a family that she lost, but could potentially be replaced, and the new family that she so often tries to make here, and what happens with those family members, those new family members, even though it turns out to be, I don't want to spoil it, but it turns out to be not what she's expected. She is ever hopeful, and she's lured by the continuing hope of things getting better for herself, which is also very much relatable to the Black experience. There were some points that I felt were a little hard to believe, like some of the choices around dating that the Black American character Brittany made. I was kind of side-eyeing her a little bit, just as someone who grew up in America and grew up in the US. I just couldn't see myself or anyone I knew, any of my friends, making some of the choices that she made. I won't go into it so much, but I will say, because we are so, as Black women, Black American women, we are kind of discouraged from dating outside of our race. So I just wanted to clarify that we're not warned against it. We are just taught that there are a lot of societal pressures that caution us around dating interracially that I don't feel like our Black male counterparts necessarily get. As women, we're just kind of always told that we should think about what our future families should look like and who we want to partner with in a way that I don't think we really see from our male counterparts. So that's just what I wanted to clarify really quickly there. It was hard for me to understand how she didn't do as much vetting as she would have, because I feel like that's kind of what ends up happening when we do decide to date outside of our race as Black women. We vet extra hard the people that we want to date, to the point where we are almost looking for a reason to break up. But that's another story for another day. I also thought the three characters would end up meeting each other at some point, but after reading the author's note, I understood and fully support why she wrote it the way that she did, in that they ended up not meeting, because it felt like those stories were uniquely their own, and they weren't kind of, or they were orbiting their own worlds, and it wasn't kind of them orbiting kind of a center universe that kind of brings them together. And I also really like that. Sweden isn't an easy place to live. Your degree of difficulty is definitely going to depend on how quickly you can whip up a community and a support system here, just like any other place. And that's magnified when you look different from everyone else, I mean. And I think that is a major theme in this book. A big part of the story was watching these three main characters fight to understand what family and community mean to them, and how those challenges reinforce the lives that they may have imagined for themselves. I really enjoyed the fact that this book is not subtle in its commentary. That's why I think I enjoyed it the most. You shouldn't expect a happy ending, because there won't be one, but it's a book that sticks with you far after you've read the last page. So I fully recommend the book. Getting to see how these characters grow, some grow more than others, but also seeing how the weight of the world can really affect you if you don't have enough of a support system. If you don't have people there that you can go to, it can really affect you at the end of the day. So yeah, with that being said, I will go into the next part of the book. So there could be spoilers here, so listen with caution. But I hope that you enjoyed my little lighthearted review as I go into more of the themes that this book explores, as well as my experiences here as a Black woman in Sweden. So let's talk about the characters. You have Kemi, who is this established marketing professional. She's like a badass at her job, isn't experiencing the same success with dating, which is, very relatable. But the way that she has experienced her professional life, I also identified with as well. You see her kind of navigating this world in the US where she feels like she is reaching the top, but she kind of feels stifled by her coworkers, and she's not sure if these experiences are race related or if these experiences are just part of being a woman. And as a Black woman, you are intersections of womanhood, and you're also intersectioning the world of race, and it's part of the, I guess, experience to just kind of always be questioning things. And I really admired her strength to say that she's gonna go to experience this new country, which is this is exactly what I did when I moved here as well. She took a risk, and I admired the fact that she really learned more about who she was throughout the book. She did not change despite the invisible pressure that a lot of people, that I personally felt here in Scandinavia from society. You kind of see in the ways that people, even the ways that people are dressed, people tend to wear similar clothing, partly because of the weather, partly because people don't shop as much at different places as they do in the US. And Kemi's character is written as someone who is more curvy, and she kind of exists against the traditional notion of what we as a collective think as the ideal Scandinavian woman, who is a little bit thinner and tall, but she doesn't kind of let that pressure mold her. You see her make comments about her own weight and the fact that she enjoys cinnamon rolls. And she has a moment in the book where she's like, I'm not eating these anymore. But at the end of the day, she does find someone who ends up loving her for the way that she is. And I'll talk more about that in the dating episode, but she also explains the way that she dresses. She has her style from the US, and she dresses, and she's always walking around in heels, and the author makes it a point to let us know that she's wearing heels all the time. And that is something now that I think about it, I don't really see that much around Stockholm. I rarely see women wearing high heels the way that I would in the US. And I think that is very intentional, because you later find out that her co-workers were essentially making note of that and talking behind her back about the way that she dresses. And she doesn't change, and I really admire her strength in that. So then there's Brittany, and I really related to her experiences with wanting as a caretaker, wanting to have someone take care of you. But the way that she goes about meeting Johnny and subsequently entering this relationship with him, the ugly truth of dating as a Black woman is you're always going to be worried when you're dating outside of your race about fetishization. How do you tell if this person likes you for you? There's an added element when you marry someone that you also marry their family, and that comes with a whole host of baggage, even when you do come from the same culture. So when that person is from another culture and they speak another language from you, when is enough for you in your mental health? And you can take on a lot. We take on a lot as Black women just daily. And so when you think of a partner, you think of a place that you can be yourself and that you can rest. And Brittany never really got that. The way that her relationship with Johnny started was very chaotic, and that chaos rang true throughout the duration of the book up until the very end. It probably got more chaotic at the very end when she realizes that his undiagnosed autism and his neurodivergence has led him to essentially pick her because he reminds her of a lost love and he has to have her, not because of anything about her, but because of the fact that she simply looks like the person that he used to love. And so you kind of see Brittany deal with all of these things through her lens of being a Black woman, but also being extremely beautiful and extremely eye-catching, and you see people like stop and stare at her because she is so beautiful and that she used to be a model, but this beauty essentially ends up being her prison. She marries Johnny, she immediately gets pregnant with his child, and she uproots her life to Sweden, and she essentially becomes, for lack of a better word, like on house arrest. Like, she doesn't leave the house, she's afraid to make friends. Even the other Black woman, she ends up meeting Kemi at some point, and they end up not getting along because of the fact that Brittany just doesn't feel comfortable in her own, she doesn't feel comfortable in the country, and she doesn't feel comfortable being there. And I couldn't understand like why she continued to put herself in these situations. Like, she never tries to make friends because she doesn't feel like she can trust people to not leak her private life to the paparazzi. But then I'm like, well, you can also like vet people as well. You don't have to disclose so much of yourself to people at the first like sight of someone. And her family was so supportive, and I really enjoyed reading about her family and her mom and dad and how they had their reservations about the relationship, but they continued to support her throughout that. Reading about her family, I was kind of like, I think that is something that you would also think about. Like, your family doesn't trust this person, like you haven't. That's not, Johnny's parents like never acknowledged her. And for me, that would be a major red flag. I don't think I could continue with a relationship if I knew someone's parents like couldn't be around me or acknowledge me. So I think Brittany's character had a rough go. She didn't have the roughest go of all the characters in the book, but I think she definitely she made some choices that I think she could have avoided. But that's part of life. One of the most interesting parts of the book for me was reading about Brittany's realization that she was a fetish. And she even like says it in the book. Like, it's written in third person, so you see her train of thought and you realize like, oh, this person is fetishizing me. And she continues to have these seeds of doubt in her head that is the case, but she never does anything about it. And so she kind of goes through the relationship as if things are good. She hates the name that Johnny picks for the baby girl, or she doesn't hate it, but she doesn't have any strong feelings towards it, and yet she still chooses to name her child that. And there was just all these choices that this character is making, and you feel as though she has so many options. Like, she's beautiful, she's young, she is educated, but she could still do something with that fashion degree that she has. But she kind of creates this illusion in her head that she needs this person, Johnny. And I guess she loves him, but you see throughout the book that he might not feel the same way about her. It's a type of love, but the love is rooted in something very not okay. And finally, there is Muna, the refugee who finds herself in Sweden. So Muna's experience was also relatable to me because she moves through society in a state oscillating between invisibility and hypervisibility. she wears a full-length hijab until she is told that it will make other Swedish people uncomfortable, so she transitions to just a hijab on her head and then wearing normal clothes throughout the rest of her outfits. And Muna's story is, I think, the most difficult to read throughout the book. It ends the most tragically because you see her lose everything in the span of the pages, the 300 pages that the book was. And she begins the book with a sense of loss after losing her family, her mother, and her brother on the boat ride over. And you see that she is just deeply saddened by this, but she's a young girl. She's the youngest of the characters. And so she's still full of hope that things will get better. And that hope is kind of dashed over and over again when it's dangled in front of her. You think that she will finally get a break, and that break subsequently is taken away. And you see in the book and understand like how much a person can really take before they are fully broken. It's either a villain origin story or a means to end very tragically. And that's exactly what happens in the book. And I related to Muna's experience because moving to a new place, even though I have incredible privilege because I was the one who decided to make the move, but starting over is never easy. And when you are overwhelmed, when you have low reserves in terms of your emotions, the littlest thing can set you off. So it's not surprising to me it's actually very surprising to me how resilient she stays throughout the majority of the book, and how she craves family more than anything else, and she gets it until she doesn't. So I was really touched by Muna's story, and I really identified with the fact of being a Black woman, and you're either not seen or you are very much seen, and it's like a hypervisibility in a bad way. And so you're oscillating between the two. And I feel like that is pretty much what each of these three characters in some ways embody, because Kemi is different. She looks different from the typical Swede, but she's in this high up position. And so people look to her and think that she's super successful, but she's constantly getting questioned. And Brittany is stunning, but she is not able to be seen by society in some ways. She doesn't let herself go outside. She doesn't even want to learn Swedish. And Muna is always, she's working as a cleaner. And so she is one of those jobs that we don't see every day. Or we see, but do we really see, you know? So let's talk about race and class in a majority white society like Sweden. Sweden is interesting because outside of the US, in the US, there are typical kind of class markers that signify where you are in the class hierarchy. And it's a lot more subtle here in Sweden. And while that sounds okay, the rules are a little different, and it becomes a little bit more interesting when you're trying to play a game and you realize that everyone else has a different set of rules. And I don't think that I've experienced that firsthand. I think, at least the class thing, I feel like when you think about class, one thing that you I don't think I've experienced that firsthand. Partly because I don't know what those class markers are. I'm not Swedish, so I don't know like what to look for that signifies that this person is of a lower or higher class than I am. I know what those American signals are, but I don't know what those Swedish ones are, and that might be for better or for worse. And one thing that this book mentioned also is the idea of hiding behind your American privilege in a way that Black immigrants cannot. And I really, really identified with that. You see the character Brittany have an experience at a Swedish mall, at the mall, where a Black immigrant is denied entry into a clothing store. And they have an exchange in she and the security guard have an exchange in Swedish, and the black immigrant is turned away from the store. And when Brittany talks to the security guard in English with her American accent, the security guard completely changes her tune. She's super nice, she's super accommodating, and things just go really well for her. And that's when she decides that she is no longer going to make an effort to learn Swedish. Her Americanness offers her a lot of privilege, and I would be lying if I didn't think the same thing as well, because I've noticed when I walk into a store sometimes, no one is really looking out for me. But when I get to the cashier and I start speaking American English with my American accent, sometimes people are like, oh my gosh, where are you from? And I tell them like what I do and where I work, and they're like, oh my gosh, that's so cool, like blah blah blah. So it's kind of like, there's definitely something there. It's hard because you feel a connection to, I don't know, how can I say this? It's hard to not understand that there is a different treatment when people understand that you are American and not from another country. It's the whole thing of like, why do we call people that come from first world countries expats and other people immigrants? And I don't think that that is right. And I definitely feel like no country is perfect. And I don't think we do ourselves any favors by ignoring the problem. And I think that that's what this book also tackles. So the book also tackles dating in a unique way. Kemi is the only character that really actively dates in the book, since Brittany is in a relationship and Muna is just focused on other things like trying to survive. You see Kemi kind of show up, as I mentioned, as her authentic self as soon as she gets to Stockholm, and she has a lot of interesting dating experiences, most of them verging on pretty negative. She makes a comment on the amount of men that she sees on dating apps who are they look very similar. She describes them as Viking-like, and she even goes on a date with a few of them. And her experiences are across the board pretty negative until she meets the person that she later falls in love with. In terms of her not fitting the standard mold of the typical Swedish woman, we see her get stood up on a date. The person that she goes to meet ends up coming into the restaurant, seeing her, and walks out and sending her a message later on saying, "You don't look like your profile picture." And I think he uses the word fat. I think he ends up saying like, "Oh, you're a little too fat." And she responds appropriately with expletives, as I probably would have as well. But that is just to say like how much people I don't know if this is how the author would have written it or is what the author is trying to say, but like, would this person have said something like that if they were a white woman? I don't know. And I also want to push back on the myth that all most Scandinavian women look the same and are one size. I have seen body diversity here. It's not as if everyone is a size 2 or size 4 with no hips. There are women who are curvier, who are taller, who are shorter here, who embody, I guess, what the antithesis of what we would think of as the typical Scandinavian body. But I digress. So we see Kemi kind of walking through this world as a woman to be kind of fetishized and consumed by the male gaze in a way that she wasn't written to have in America. In America, she was going on dates, she just wasn't meeting the right person who fit kind of all the check boxes that she had for herself as a professional woman. She was looking for that. But here in Sweden, she is more seen as something to, I guess, get or consume. And I understood that to be a critique on the male gaze and how we can, as Black women, can be seen as someone to consume and have pieces of men, but never the full thing. And Kemi ends up meeting someone. She ends up finding a really great guy whose name is Tobias, and they have so much in common and they connect really well. But she still entertains an affair with a coworker, and that was hard for me as a reader to understand because I don't know, I guess I've just never been in a situation where like I'm so enthralled by a person's like chemistry or like body chemistry that I can't like control myself. It's kind of like otherworldly, their attraction to one another, that they just can't keep they can't keep their hands off of one another. But this person is married with a child and another child on the way, and he's also made racially inappropriate comments to Brittany, and Kemi doesn't know this. She knows that he's married, but she still, like, this is kind of her growth as a character, her choosing to say, I'm not going to settle for being a fetish. I'm not going to be settled for a piece of a man who does not respect me when I have what I want and I have what I need in a viable partner with Tobias. And she actually ends up making a plan to leave Sweden, which I understood that decision because she wasn't being respected. She wasn't being used to her full potential at the company that she was at. But I really valued her growth as a character because she understood her worth, and she understood that even though dating this person doesn't look like what I imagined for myself, Tobias is a security guard, and he's what we would call in the US like blue collar, not white collar, blue collar employee who probably makes a decent living, is making a living wage, but in her mind or her family's mind, she feels this family pressure, she feels this internal pressure to be with someone who has status. And this person that she's having an affair with technically has that status, but what's the point of that status if he doesn't respect you at the end? I would say Kemi deals with the most disrespect from men, both professionally and personally in her dating life. And I think that that kind of helps guide her decision to effectively leave Sweden. I think she gets the most disrespect from like both sexes actually. Like she is questioned constantly at work, and then she has these horrible dating experiences, but that's just part of the dating. That's just part of dating essentially. But I think it does make it extra hard when you are a Black woman and you're seen as not the quote unquote standard of beauty here, and people think that you are available for people see you as more of just a physical vessel, but not a fully formed human being that they should respect and that demands respect, because everyone does. That brings us to the ending and my experience here in Sweden. I have a lot of thoughts on the ending. It felt a little abrupt to me, but at the same time, I liked the way that it wrapped up. It wasn't a perfect ending. It didn't wrap up in a perfect little bow, but that's not how life is. And so I kind of appreciated that it was a little bit more real and raw, because sometimes that's the way that it goes. Only one of the women end up staying in Sweden. At least that's what we're led to believe. And she ends up having to stay by choice. I don't know how Brittany's story ends up, but it doesn't look good when we are seeing her in the last few pages of the book. But all that to say, this book really made me reflect on my own experiences living here and how I found myself adjusting to Scandinavian culture. And as a Black woman, I feel pretty normal here. I don't know if that's disappointing to hear, but to be honest, I feel more like Muna's situation, where it's more of a invisibility verging on hypervisibility at the same time. I live in a pretty good area in the center of the city, and I don't see that many Black people when I'm walking around my neighborhood, but when I go into the city center or when I go into other cities verging on Stockholm, it feels way more diverse, and I can definitely feel like there are more people who look like me. And I get stares on the train, and sometimes if I'm having like a particularly bad day, it can be a little bit annoying because I'm used to growing up in New York City and living in Atlanta and Chicago. I am used to living in majority minority cities, and I'm used to seeing a lot of people who look like me. And coming here to Sweden for the first time, this is my first experience not having that. And so I think for Black people who have grown up in white areas, this might be something that they're used to, but it's still taking some getting used to for me. I've never made to feel unsafe in Stockholm, which I'm really appreciative of. But because I know my experience, I make it a point to seek out community with other Black women. And that has honestly been my saving grace here. And I don't know how I would have survived without it. It's hard. It's notoriously hard to make friends here in Sweden because if you don't speak Swedish, you have to learn that because that's like a prerequisite to make kind of close connections. Plus the fact that we've been in a pandemic, we've been working from home. Swedes like to separate their home and work life. So if you are not getting out there, it's just going to be a lot harder. But finding a community and finding people that I connect with and that I can go to when I'm having a hard time has really been my saving grace. And I think that that's a lot of what this book speaks to. The women who end up having it the worst lose their community, and the women who end up having the happy ending have a community. They found people that they've connected with, and they found people that feel like home to them. And so I guess that that's just been my biggest lesson and takeaway from living here, is the importance of finding people that are around you, because Lord knows you're going to have a lot of issues. Lord knows there are going to be challenges with moving to a new country. You're going to meet a lot of people. Some of them are going to be really great. You're going to meet a lot of angels. You're going to meet a lot of devils when you're moving abroad. But finding a way to meet some new people and joining groups. There are groups for Black women here in Sweden. People don't think that it's diverse, and I would say like we're out here, like we're here. And so just finding them is going to be what you need to do. So yeah, who knows what the future holds for me. I don't know if I will stay in Sweden long term, but I've learned more this past year about myself than I have in decades. So for that, I'm very grateful. And I hope that you all found my rambling entertaining and helpful. Please let me know your thoughts on the book. I would love to hear what people like. Did you like it? Did you not like it? What were your critiques? What did you want to see more of? And I hope that you have a great new year, and I will see you in another video. Bye.